Now, wind farms are usually sold to us as so holy, so good that, problems with them swept under the carpet. This week, a worker was killed at the Golden Plains wind farm in Victoria when a giant blade he was helping to install fell over. And obviously, that tragedy was a one-off, an accident. But then locals reminded reporters that serrated blade parts have been flying off wind turbines and onto neighbouring properties from this very same wind farm. And they've been told to wear personal protective equipment within 400 metres of those turbines. They've now been told that's been fixed as well. But as we come into summer, I still worry about something else. And not just that these wind farms chop up birds. There's the fire risk. Now, one, of course, is that there's all these extra power lines that we now need to join up, all these wind factories, all around the countryside. Clashing wires are, of course, a fire risk. And the more wires you have, there's also the more risk they can be blown over, which could trip the whole system, as Victoria found in February with a massive blackout. But the fire risk from the wind turbines themselves, we're told this risk is very low. But with so many of them, a very low risk in one turbine becomes too much for comfort with a lot. In Portland, Victoria, one turbine burst into flames in February. There was one in Red Hill, South Australia, that caused a fire that cost more than $2 million. In Goulburn last year, New South Wales, another turbine caught fire. And yet another at Cathedral Rocks that year, South Australia, the second fire, by the way, at the same wind farm. Joining me is electricity engineer Ben Beattie, host of the Baseload Project podcast, talking about our energy system. Ben Beattie, thank you so much for your time. I must say your Baseload podcast, great listening. I wish you'd do it more often. It's fantastic stuff. I know you've got a full-time job. At least 4 wind turbines in Australia catching fire in less than 2 years. That sounds to me like a real risk.
Yeah, it does. And thanks for having me on, Andrew, and thanks for the plug. Much appreciated. I wish I could do it more often as well, but it's a hell of a hobby to take on. So bearings in turbines is going to be the main fault with the fires. When you think about regular turbines, we have plenty of them in Australia. So these ground-mounted turbines, they're in solid, fixed foundations. They have control systems that monitor vibration, oil temperature, bearing temperature, the bearing position. And they use journal bearings where there's no metal-to-metal contact. The shaft spins in an oil film microns thick. So if you keep the oil clean, the right temperature and pressure, that bearing will last decades, like literally decades. But the nacelle of a wind turbine is not a stable platform inherently. Certainly not stable enough to use journal bearings. So these roller bearings, which do have metal-to-metal contact by design, that creates heat. And the bearings wear, and that wear leaves metal particles into oil, which increases the wear and the heat. And so that's basically the failure mechanism of a lot of these things. And further, if you have a ground-mounted machine, it's easy to access and maintain. There's space for your coolers, your filters, backup pumps, all the gear required to keep it in tip-top shape. But a wind turbine is space-constrained. It's weight constrained, it's difficult and dangerous to access. So the guys who do the maintenance up there in the air, how many hundreds of meters it is these days, they have to be specially trained not only in gearboxes and bearings and electrical work, they all have to be specially trained just getting up there. So it's no wonder that there's going to be some failures. It's just a very tough environment for bearings, and things get hot and cause fires.
Now, this sounds to me like a real time bomb waiting in the very combustible bush. And I think we may pay for it. And we just don't hear enough. I mean, there are probably ways of suppressing this, but we don't hear enough. By the way, the latest United Nations Climate Conference is on right now. As you know, Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen is going with our money in his pocket, which is a scare, because China, the world's biggest emitter, has just told the meeting that developed countries like us should pay the rest of the world, like China, $1.8 trillion to help them deal with climate change, which is no wonder then that the Taliban terrorist regime has turned up at this conference to yabber about the climate. Does this strike you as the greatest scam out for third world countries?
Yeah, it seems a bit rich, doesn't it? I mean, the people in Taliban-controlled areas probably have a bit more to worry about than what method of electricity they get during the day and the night. I'd much prefer to see someone like Matt Canavan sent over to the climate meetings. I think he'd make a great impact.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Why not? instead of. But in fact, I got a warning for you because Chris Bowen apparently has been asked to be part of all these negotiations about where money is going. So that's freaking me out. Ben Beattie, thank you so much for your time. Great podcast. Thank you so much.